Hello, welcome back to Hazel Jane Tarot. And today I'm bringing you a deck review of my oldest tarot deck, the Tarot of a Moon Garden, that I purchased way back in 1997. So this is a mass market deck. It's still available, still in print. It's from US Games, and I think it was published first in 1993. So the deck little booklet is written by Laura E. Clarkson, and the artist is Karen Marie Swikart. Now, this is a deck that I really love because it is my oldest tarot deck. It's the deck that got me into tarot. It's the deck that got me to buy a tarot deck in the very first instance. But I also think there's some problems with the way the deck is designed, and I actually don't think it was a very good first tarot deck, even though it was the only deck I had for more than 15 years. So it wasn't that bad as a first tarot deck, obviously, because it got me into tarot in the first place. So I no longer have the box, and I believe this was the design that was on the front of the box. This is the little index card that it came with, and the box was like a deep purple, with this image, I think, on the front, and I think maybe the sun card on the back. I'm not sure, I can't remember. I wish I still had the box, but the tuck box got absolutely wrecked over the years of many house moves and taking it with me to various places, and so it lives actually in this little bag. It's been wrapped up in this bag for many years. So but I do no longer have the box that it came in. Those are the back designs. So that's what the original cards looked like in terms of the borders. They've got this sort of blue floral sort of border, and then a white border around that. My deck is trimmed. And the reason my deck is trimmed is because when I first got into the tarot community online, I saw people had edged their decks, and I thought, well, I could give the Tarot of a Moon Garden a new lease of life, and I could edge it purple, which was a silly idea because the borders were white, and I've learned, of course, that if a border is white front and back, edging it purple is not a good idea. But the deck had been shuffled so many times, and the cards were really softened with age, and so very porous around the edges. And when I tried to edge it with a Sharpie, I completely destroyed the deck. So I had to trim it. And I had to trim it by hand with a corner, not using a corner rounder, but using scissors, because of the shape of the little the blue border design. I didn't attempt to get in neat to that, but I did sort of hand round the corners with the scissors. It's came out okay, it's fine, but I sort of would prefer to go back in time and not have started the whole process, and to still have the borders intact. But anyway, this is a deck, as I say, I bought way back, and I'm just going to page through the major arcana and show you them here as I'm talking to you about my first experiences with this deck. I really love the major arcana, actually. I still love the way they're drawn. The world of this deck is very whimsical, very colourful. The recurring elements that you see in many cards are unicorns, dragons, fairies, these dragonfly hilt swords. So even the swords are softened, with the dragonfly hilts. The staffs have like little leaves growing on them, and there's a lot of trees in the background, and the staffs, it is mostly all trees. So you see these recurring elements of the dragons and the unicorns and so on. But in the major arcana, they're drawn very similar to the Rider-Waite-Smith, but just in this sort of whimsical, magical style. So there are the two pillars. You can see the sea in the background, behind the High Priestess, who is a mermaid. But there's the crescent moon, and she's holding the Torah scroll and so on. So a lot of the elements from Pixie's art from the Rider-Waite-Smith have been retained. You've got the cornucopia that the Empress is sitting on. So for me as a beginner tarot reader, when I started looking at tarot books, the major arcana kind of made good sense to me. Like you can see the airy symbolism on the throne of the emperor, and it's a stone throne, and you can see his abundant kingdom behind, with the produce. You've got the acolytes and the crossed keys in front of the Hierophant. But one of the things I do like about this Hierophant is, it would remind you of Stonehenge or some of the goddess temples in Malta. We've got you're outdoors in an ancient temple, not in a cathedral or something. I loved that lover's card when I first got this deck. I thought it was really beautiful and romantic. Like, the characters are very youthful. So I was only 18 when I bought this deck. So it's funny because this style of deck, like fairies and mermaids and dragons, is not at all what I go for in a tarot deck these days. So if I hadn't had it from way back when, I don't think I would buy this deck today. Which probably is a bit of a shame. I think I would be missing out. I like the way the lemniscate is woven around her head, like a kind of a headband, A nice hermit. So you can see the major arcana are really lovely. So when there was a shop, like the magic shop that sells tarot decks and crystals and incense and, a few items of clothing, that kind of place. There was a shop like that in the town that I went to university in, and we would go there on the weekend and have a look at what they had in the shop. And I looked at the box. Now, you couldn't open it, you couldn't take it out, and I mean, this was early internet in terms of having easy access to the internet. We could use the computers in the labs at university to access the internet, but we didn't do that very often. So there was no way to go and look at the cards or anything. So I just looked at the outside of the box. I love death riding on a dragon. Isn't it so cool? So I just looked at the box, and I remember just going back day after day, weekend after weekend, and looking at the box. And I think it was about £17, which for me, on my student loans and my holiday job savings, was a lot of money. And so I did think hard and deep about it. Plus, coming from a Catholic background, look at the devil, the claws holding the chain. The people are almost invisible. Like, design wise, I really think that's quite a cool devil card. And it did scare me a little when I first got this deck, but the design, overall aesthetic of this deck is so gentle. It's not particularly, even the tower, it's dramatic. There are bodies falling into the sea, but it's pastel. But coming from a Catholic background, I did think more than once or twice about getting a tarot deck because of all the superstition around that. But I did in the end go for it and purchase this deck. This was my favorite card when I got the deck first. The star. This was my favorite card for years and years and years, actually. I love the lines of the water and the colours and how that's done. Although I wouldn't have broken it down for you like that then. I just loved it. Loved the feel of it. It's very calm and peaceful. And I think I found the moon quite an unsettling card when I got this deck first, but the moon's one of my favourite cards in the major arcana now, which is funny. Anyway, so it was a lovely deck and lovely appealing box. And when I got it home and I started to work with it, see, fairies. This is where we started to have some problems. So the major arcana, I think, are great. And I still like the major arcana. The minor arcana are quite inconsistently illustrated. So they are based on the Rider-Waite-Smith, but they're not all based on the Rider-Waite-Smith. And some of the cards are very pippish and some of the cards are kind of illustrated. So, oh, that's the court cards. Whoops. I was trying to show you the aces. So some of the cards are more illustrated than others. And that's what I found very confusing when I first started reading tarot. So look at the aces. I mean, they're lovely. There's a lovely consistent design aesthetic across the deck. All the pentacles are these kind of bubbles, which is really nice. And then you have the trees for the staffs. You have these dragonfly hilts on the swords. And the cups are all these sort of golden goblets. So I really like those aces. I think they're great. I like the Ace of Cups in particular. It's very, I suppose it's very Catholic looking with the with the communion and the sort of the water pouring out of the chalice and so on. Now, the only resource I had when I first started reading this deck is the little white book. And I have to say, it's a very generic little white book. I would imagine it's one of those little white books that might have been reproduced across multiple decks. I'd be interested to know if, apart from the introduction, if the card meanings are the same for multiple US games published decks around that time period. That would be my theory anyway. So, for example, let's just pick a card. So I'll show you the swords maybe to start off with. So there's our Ace of Swords. And the card meaning is great determination, initiative, strength, force, activity, excessiveness, triumph, power, success, fertility, prosperity, deep emotional feeling, love, championship, and conquest. With the reverse meanings of debacle, tyranny, disaster, self-destruction, violent temper, embarrassment, obstacle, and infertility. You can see where I struggled. First of all, I couldn't see how you got from that to any of those meanings. And I guess without the sort of foundational knowledge of swords being to do with, thoughts and ideas and decisiveness and, these kind of things, it didn't make sense to me. So you can see this one. I think I've actually got the Rider-Waite-Smith swords here just to show you for comparison. So you can see that the illustrator has taken elements from the Rider-Waite-Smith. And to be fair, even with the Rider-Waite-Smith images, if all I had was this, I think I still would have struggled a bit to understand what the card was actually getting at. And you can see, there, instead of a piercing a heart, we've got a heart made of leaves, so it's slightly gentler illustration, which is fine. Here we have echoes of this illustration with the lying down unicorn and the helmet of there's no people in these cards. And you can see they're almost like the Rider-Waite-Smith illustrations where the people have been taken out. Like there's 3 swords with 2 lying down and maybe like a dragon that has 1. In the 6 of Swords, the way the dragon is portrayed out in the sea, it almost looks like a boat. And again, we have 5 swords and 2 left behind. So you can see the elements. And these last couple of cards from the swords are very like the Rider-Waite-Smith. The 8, the 9, and the 10. Although, of course, the swords aren't piercing the back because that would be too extreme for the Tower of the Moon Garden. It's gentle. But because a lot of the cards are very pippish, and I'll show you here the wands are particularly so, because it's all these trees. So there we've got, compared with the Rider-Waite-Smith. So the ace is, or the 2 is almost exactly the same as the Rider-Waite-Smith. So when I'm looking at the guidebook and it's telling me that the 2 of staffs means a mature individual, a ruler, attainment of goals and needs, boldness, courage and undertakings, a dominant personality, I can maybe start to see a little bit of that. And if I read other tarot books, I could maybe make more sense of that too. Again, you see it's like the person's been removed. So there's the sea with the ship coming in and the 3 staffs, not really on a cliff top, but you get the general idea. But to me, without the people in those scenes as my very first tarot deck, I find it hard to read with. I think nowadays, it's easy. I think for anybody who has a working knowledge of Rider-Waite-Smith and the concepts behind tarot, they would find the Tower of the Moon Garden enjoyable to read with. Like even the positioning of those staffs is similar to the Rider-Waite-Smith, but you don't have any people fighting with them or, trying to put up a tent, whatever they're doing. So the concept behind the card isn't portrayed as obviously, even though, without, there's no rider, but the idea is very similar. But then look at the 7 of staffs. It's just 7 trees. Then the 8 of staffs. One of the elements that confused me when I was learning tarot with this deck was this heart, because it reminded me of the 3 of swords. And I think that heart made from the ferns was a bit of a confusing element to include. Then the 9 of staffs. You've got 9 staffs. And I guess the unicorn is sort of like the person here, but that was not at all clear to me when I first learned the deck. And then again, you've got 10 trees. It's just 10 trees. So when I was learning tarot, I found this deck a bit confusing. Now, looking at it, I can see how it is Rider-Waite-Smith reminiscent. Some cards, as you can see, are very heavily illustrated, like the Rider-Waite-Smith, like the Five of Pentacles is very much like. But others less so. I mean, there's a person there with those 6 pentacles. Here we just have 7 pentacles. Here we have 8 pentacles and like an art easel. 9 of pentacles. There's a sense of a garden. You know, there's a gate. 10 of pentacles. There's maybe a couple on their way home to their castle, perhaps, going under the bridge. I don't know. And then lovely Ace of Cups. 2 of Cups, there's a heart made out of these ferns. The 3 of Cups, we've got these 3 fairies sitting in the cups. 4 of Cups, yeah, that reminds me of a lot of 4 of Cups that I have, the sort of, the person sitting. 5 of Cups with 3 knocked over and 2 standing up. You know, so there's symbolic elements that are like the Rider-Waite-Smith, but as a beginner, 8 cups lying on the ground, no person walking away, that I couldn't really understand how you got from these images to the meanings in the book. But I think the main issue is the issue around this, the little white book. It's not so much the illustrations as it is the book, because what we have here is a generic list of keywords: responsibility and creativity, a learned person, a professional, a businessman, a lawyer, a religious person, a scientist, a considerate person, a kind and reliable person with a liberal manner, an artist with an interest in the arts and science. It's too many different things. And as a brand new reader of tarot, you can see how old this is, how rusted the paper, the staples are. As a brand new reader of tarot, I couldn't make head nor tail of that little white book. So, but for all that, I used to do readings for my friends. So I'll just show you the quartz. The quartz are lovely. Although you don't maybe get that contrast between the Knight of Pentacles as a stationary knight and the Knight of Swords charging in there, you know, because he's charging too. But they are lovely. They're very lovely to look at. Although their eyes are kind of odd, but they're lovely images. I do like the quartz in this deck a lot. So I think if I bought this as a very first tarot deck today, I think there are better resources available both online and as books. I think there are better books out there than the books that I had access to. I had, love her, black cat, the sunflower, she's beautiful. I had access to very basic books that I picked up in like cheap bookstores as a student. There weren't really the online resources, or if there were, I didn't know about them. So I was just working with the little white book for the longest time. And so I would do a reading for friends and I would just use the little white book. And somehow, you know, it's tarot. So somehow we would still pull some cards and they would still make kind of sense for the situation. And I was able to do pretty good readings. I never made up my own spreads. I only used spreads out of books that I found. I had a book on tarot spreads that I'd found. So I was able to get good readings with it, even with the little white book. But I think my overall feeling on this deck now is, if you like this aesthetic, if you know the Rider-Waite-Smith system and the general concept of tarot, like the suits and the majors and what the cards mean and so on, I think this is a lovely tarot deck and you could get some really nice readings with it. For me now, I find it as a very comforting deck. I don't read with it often. In fact, it had been years before I'd touched it, and then last month I pulled it out and was reading with it. Reading with it quite often, read with it for daily draws, read with it for larger readings. And an old friend from uni who'd asked me to do a reading for her, I sent her, I'd done the reading and I sent her the photographs using this deck, and she was like, old faithful's back out again, nice to see it. Because my friends back then would have seen quite a lot of this deck. So I think for me now, it's like a, not inner child, but yeah, the inner teenager definitely. And there's something very comforting and reassuring about this deck. But the aesthetic of, as I say, the fairies and the dragons and so on, it's not something I would have bought for myself today if I was going to get a brand new deck. But it is lovely. I just think my word of caution with this deck would be, if you are new to tarot, or say if you were wanting to buy a tarot deck for someone else that you thought would really like this, like you have a niece who you think would be into tarot and you think they'd dig all the unicorns and so on. My word of caution would be to get them a good book, and also the Rider-Waite Smith. I think if I'd had this when I was learning, and I had been able to see how the elements, visual elements from this deck, some of those symbols were replicated in the Tarot of a Moon Garden, I would have been able to maybe connect that more with the meanings I was reading about in, say, 78 Degrees of Wisdom. But I didn't have 78 Degrees of Wisdom then, and I didn't have the Rider-Waite Smith then. So it didn't make as much sense to me then. Although somehow I kept at it and kept reading. And I did buy, as I said, a couple of cheap books on tarot card meanings, which I've since charity shopped because I bought better books. But the Tarot for Yourself by Mary K. Greer was the first sort of decent tarot book that I had, and I worked through it using this deck as well. So I did start to understand some of the symbols in the deck then. I was never really able to find a sort of common thread as to what a dragon means when it comes up in this deck, or what a fairy means, or what a unicorn means. I think I did try to construct meaning out of that at some point when I was working through Tarot for Yourself, and there wasn't really. But anyway, I have talked about this deck for much longer than I'd intended to. I thought this was going to be quite a short review. But yeah, I suppose it is my oldest. It is my oldest deck, and there are a lot of memories and associations with it. So if you've watched for this long, thank you very much for watching and for checking out my channel. If you haven't already, I would love it if you subscribed. It does give a wee boost when you see the subscriber numbers popping up there. But what I would most like you to do if you've watched this long is to put a little comment below if you've used Tarot of a Moon Garden and what you think about this deck, and if you like it, and if it's a deck that you think is a good beginner deck or not. I would love to have that chat with you in the comments. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you back here again soon.